Hello, I am here today to talk to you about basic income and how we can make it happen by guy standing, and also just the general concept of basic income. So basic income, also known as universal basic income or UBI, or national basic income. I think I'm probably going to talk more about national basic income because we live in nations. It is the concept of a government providing every one of its citizens with an amount of money, usually paid monthly, as a social security. So what exactly is a basic income? Well, for one, it is unconditional, meaning that it is paid to absolutely everybody in spite of their station, gender, orientation, background, race. Although most policies differentiate with age, usually it has different rates for children and the elderly. And also, if we're talking about national basic income, it may have a requirement based on whether you are a permanent citizen of that country, but for the most part, unconditional. Basic income is a permanent right, which means that it cannot be taken away at any point in the future. Another key component is that it is paid to individuals and not households. So why do we want a basic income? Why now? There are loads of reasons why this is a good idea. Chiefly, it's about reducing poverty. In most countries, there is a growing income inequality, and basic income addresses this directly. Usually, it is defined at around the poverty level in terms of actual amount of money. So immediately, nobody would be in poverty. That's good. Practicalities of implementing it usually mean that it would be lower than the poverty rate, but it's enough to give an individual financial security, meaning that they have better bargaining strength to say no to low wages. They should have a better ability to continue with education and seek medical advice when needed. Because it's paid individually, it encourages personal financial autonomy. It's pretty much all of the good things. Standing talks at length about the alternatives to a basic income, including minimum wage, negative income tax, tax credits, and you test them against 5 social justice principles. I'm just going to read this out. The first is the social difference principle. A policy is socially just only if it improves the security of the least secure groups in society. The paternalism test principle. A policy is only socially just if it does not impose controls on some groups that are not also imposed on the most free groups in society. The rights not charity principle. A policy is socially just if it enhances the rights of the recipients of benefits or services and limits the discretionary power of those providers. He also includes the ecology constraint principle. A policy is socially just only if it does not impose ecological costs borne by the community or by those directly affected. And the dignified work principle. A policy is only socially just if it does not impede people from pursuing work in a dignified way and if it does not disadvantage the most insecure groups in that respect. Unsurprisingly, basic income stands up against all of those principles. A thing that he brings up a lot is that most current social welfare programs are means tested, which means they only apply if your income is under a certain amount or you have this sort of disability, etc., which is discriminatory in several ways, and it also encourages people to not be truthful about those things. Besides that, there's a lot of admin fees associated with means tested benefits. One of the most standard objections is, why give the same amount of money to the rich as to the poor that actually need it? And one answer to that is, as I just said, admin costs. And another is this little teaser that I'm going to espouse that was by Greg Manwick. Consider an economy in which the average income is $50,000 but with a lot of inequality. So here are the two options. A universal transfer of $10,000 to every single person funded by a 20% flat income tax, or a means-tested transfer of $10,000. The full amount goes to someone without any income. The transfer is then phased out. You lose 20 cents of it for every dollar of income you earn. These transfers are financed by a tax of 20% on income above $50,000. You hear that and you're like, obviously the second one, because then the poorer people get more money and the rich people are taxed. But if you math that out, it's exactly the same. Standing talks about a lot of the other usual objections to universal basic income, including the fear of lower wages and inflation rises, that it might reduce the incentive for people to work, that there's a lack of reciprocity and people getting something for nothing, and that it would dismantle a lot of existing welfare programs that are really needed in terms of extra benefits for disabled people. It has a good response for all of the objections, and he uses a lot of examples of basic income pilots and research that give a lot of clout to what he's saying. Obviously, this is a book by a guy that really believes in basic income. He literally is the co-founder of the Basic Income Earth Network. So it obviously is quite biased, and I don't know how much to believe of any of the research he's put forth because there might be counter research for it. Live in a post-truth world, guys. But he did a great job of convincing me that basic income is a really good direction for all countries to go in. And I never thought I'd care as much about tax as I did when I read this. So that's my review of the book, and now we're going to get real personal, and I'm going to talk about 2 things about it that made me really uncomfortable. I think it's important for me to give you a bit of background on myself and my economic situation before divulging these opinions. So just for context, I grew up in a very middle-class family, pretty affluent. I was privately educated, but both of my parents were self-employed, one of them running a small business, one like a medium-sized business, and we kind of went through financial ups and downs. So at certain stages of my childhood we had no money, and other times we were doing alright. I'm currently undertaking a master's and I work 3 days a week. I earn far more than the London living wage, and that's because I had a skill that was fostered in my own time, and that was only possible because I had access to computers at a young age and freedom and time to work on it, and because I'm a privileged white girl. I intend to follow my parents' footsteps in being quite entrepreneurial. I intend to make quite a lot of money in my lifetime, but only to reinvest it in businesses and not just to live a flashy lifestyle. I'm socially very liberal, but when it comes to fiscal policies, I tend to vote Conservative. This isn't a video I really want to talk about political leanings in, but I am open to having compassionate discussions in the comments down below if you want to ask me about anything. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the affordability issue of the basic income. Where does the money come from to fund it? Obviously, it's a great idea. Everyone having freedom, everyone having security, great idea. Where to get the money from? And I'm going to talk about affordability specifically in the UK. Stanley mentions quite a few ways that we could fund this in the UK. I'm going to talk specifically about 2 of them. And the first being pretty much taxing the things that aren't taxed currently. Reducing the amount of tax breaks and exemptions that usually only benefit those that earn a lot in the first place. It says that the tax on income from property and from investments should equal the tax on normal income, which I can't really disagree with. If I was being individualistic, I'd be like, no, because I'm gonna have loads of property investments, but no, totally fair enough. He also talks about tax on income from intellectual property, which I guess is more of a case-by-case thing, because that gets complicated, but yeah, acceptable. And then the one point that I was like, ugh, was the land value tax. This is something that the Labour Party actually have in their manifesto, and it's essentially a tax on just owning land, because the value of the land is increased by a lot of the things that councils do for communities and stuff like that. But the reason that shook me was because I'd always been taught, my dad works in property investment now a bit, and the whole of my life it's been told to me, once you have property, you're good. Property is a stable asset, and that is your security. Security for me as a middle class person who is not in poverty is owning property. And something like a land value tax just kind of scared me a bit. It is so obvious that income security for all is so much more important than security for the people that are already financially secure. Yeah, it's a hard one for me to kind of puzzle out and identify why I was so shook by that. My issue with it is that it's not a tax on income, it's a tax on what could just be a stagnant asset. People always say cars are a really bad investment because they devalue themselves very quickly. Property is always meant to be a stable investment. And as somebody that intends to have investments, and I think that my security is linked to investment, the idea that nothing could be a stable investment is quite scary. I feel like none of that came out right, and I'm just little rich girl just being oh, they're taking away more of my money. The other thing that bothered me was the income tax increases. Oh, what a shocker. It has some stats by this political think tank, which is basically giving most people £61 a week, which is about £3,000 a year. For context, the London living wage, if you imagine it as a salary, is something like £20,000 a year. They're saying that in terms of strict revenue neutrality, as in not getting any funds from anything but income tax, you could do it by abolishing the personal tax allowance, which is the first I think it's £11,000 this year, it doesn't get taxed at all. Ending lower national insurance contribution and raising each income tax band by 3 percentage points. So then income tax and national insurance rates would amount to 35% for the basic band, 55% for the higher band, and 60% for the top band. I did some maths on this earlier, tell me if these figures are wrong, but that's something it ends up about £160,000, half of your income is taken away from you. I know you're thinking, oh, they only get £80,000, they can't live on that. But really, it's the people, I'm a bit of a capitalist, I am a capitalist. It's the people, you need people that make money so that they can give other people jobs. I want to earn money so yeah, I can make my ideas come to life and stuff, but I'd also like to have businesses that employ other people. And it's way hard to get to that point when taxes stifle innovation and they stifle entrepreneurialism. We in the UK already have very high income tax compared to most countries. And that's just too far for me. It really reduces my drive to want to start a business that employs lots of people just purely because you're fighting against that tax so much. It's really hard to get going when there are high taxes. The higher our taxes, the fewer global corporations will want to be based in the UK. It really doesn't do favours for the economy. I feel like most people I know vote Labour, and I don't think many of them have thought about the economic consequences of having higher taxes in general. It's mostly just tax the rich, they can afford it. But the consequences of that are vast and they just seem unaddressed. Anyway, this has got quite political. Please call me out on my shit. Like, I am totally okay and happy to do that. I want to have healthy discussions around these things. And there are so many other ways to fund basic income. They're a mix of a lot of the things described. I think it's great. I hope we see it in the next decade, maybe, in the UK. It's interesting to see how pilots are coming along globally, and the awareness of it globally is also increasing. And if you're intrigued by this, please pick up this book. It was very interesting. I'm probably not going to do another video on a non-fiction book in a while. Thinking about politics usually just riles me up and not in a productive way. But this was a good thing to talk about and go through, I think. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon.